Over the past 18 months, tensions have flared between Moscow and Washington, igniting a conflict that is quickly escalating. Russia invaded the Ukraine, prompting America to retaliate with crippling sanctions. A sudden and dramatic drop in oil prices has left the energy-dependent Russian economy in bad shape. Under heavy pressure from the Kremlin, Putin has been on the offensive, flying Russian bombers near British airspace, dumping U.S. dollars, and a slew of other acts that range from aggressive posturing to downright frightening, such as a cyber attack on 9 American banks, during which 76 million financial accounts were compromised. To determine what's really happening in this new Cold War and how it affects everyday Americans, we recently sat down with former hedge fund manager Tikka Tiwari, who was on the front lines of the last economic crisis in Russia. Nicknamed Dr. Crisis for his prescience in foreseeing major economic events, Tiwari made $1.2 million in 1998 by predicting Russia's default on bond payments and the sell-off that ensued. He was the youngest vice president in Lehman Brothers' 100-plus year history and was featured on ABC's Nightline in early 2008, where he predicted an even greater crash in stock prices. This interview took place at our studios in Palm Beach, Florida, just a few days ago. We encourage you to watch it right now while it's still available online. Tonight we're excited to be joined in the studios by former hedge fund manager Tikka Tiwari, who's just published a controversial piece called The New Cold War Playbook. It tells a story about this escalating crisis with Russia in a way that may be alarming to most of our viewers. Tikka has agreed to pass along the best ideas from his playbook on how to shelter your retirement accounts from this situation and also potentially make a lot of money as it unfolds in the months ahead. Tikka, good evening, and thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Bob.
My goal for this interview is to shed light on a situation that's been unfolding behind the scenes in Washington and Russia, and to identify steps our viewers can take today to protect themselves and position themselves financially.
This is information every American needs to have, Bob.
Okay, Tikka, so let's get into why we're here today. Things have been heating up with Russia. Can you tell our viewers at home what's been going on and what's coming up next and why they need to pay careful attention?
Absolutely, Bob. Well, there are a couple of trigger events that have taken place recently which have made Russia quite volatile and dangerous to the United States. Every American watching today should pay close attention to the situation I'm going to describe. The first event is the recent plunge in oil. Prices dropped by as much as 60% over the last 6 months. Now, this is great news for American consumers. We're seeing the lowest prices at the pump in more than 6 years. I don't know about you, Bob, but it's been as low as $2.31 a gallon where I live in Pennsylvania. The average American household will spend $750 less on gas this year because of lower oil prices. On the other hand, for Russia, this oil shock has been devastating. Half of Russia's GDP growth comes from energy sales. It's the lifeblood of their economy. Every $10 that oil prices fall cuts Russian export revenue by 2%. Already there is fear of rioting in Russia. Bank runs. The ruble, Russia's currency, has fallen as much as 50%. Russian President Vladimir Putin is beyond angry at the U.S. Recently, he gave Russia's version of the State of the Union, in which he accused us of trying to chain the Russian bear and tear out its claws.
But the recent oil plunge has nothing to do with America.
Maybe and maybe not. There's no way to know for certain. One prevailing theory is that the American government made a backroom deal with their allies, the Saudis, to plunge the oil market. You see, Russia is a supporter of Syria, and according to the New York Times, the Saudis are pressuring Russia to abandon support of the Syrians. Whether it's true that the U.S. colluded with Saudi Arabia to tank oil prices is anyone's guess. But Putin believes it is, and even hinted at it in an angry speech he gave a couple of months ago in Moscow. And that's what matters here, because he's furious and mobilizing against us. The second event is the backlash from the sanctions we slapped on Russia. As your viewers likely know, last year we placed sanctions on Russia because of their actions in the Ukraine and Crimea.
From what I've heard, the sanctions have likely hurt Putin and his cronies financially.
Yes, this isn't some guy who's happy making his reported $91,000 a year salary. It's a pretty well-known and a believable rumor that Putin has extraordinary wealth socked away. Hedge fund manager Bill Browder, once the largest investor in Russia, estimates Putin's net worth to be around $200 billion. That's more than twice as rich as the world's wealthiest person. To keep up appearances, he and his wife live in a modest $210,000 apartment in Moscow. Yet he's been seen sporting a $500,000 crocodile skin and platinum watch called a turbograph. And according to some investigators, he may be the owner of a $350 million palace on the Black Sea. It's also believed that he has major stakes in Rosneft and Gazprom.
Russia's energy giants, right?
Well, not just that. They're two of the largest energy companies in the world. Rosneft is right up there with ExxonMobil, and Gazprom is 50% bigger than Exxon. Actually, it's the single largest producer of natural gas in the world. The sanctions have crushed these two companies. Just look at a one-year stock chart of Rosneft. The stock has fallen nearly 50% in a year. On top of that, the company had to lay off 1,000 employees and sell off a prized oil field to cut costs. So we're already hurting Russia. The currency has plunged, inflation is soaring, they've had to raise interest rates. As the deputy chief of Russia's central bank said, what is happening is a nightmare that we could not even have imagined a year ago. Putin's back is against the wall. According to the CEO of the Hermitage Fund, one of the most successful investment hedge funds, Russian insiders are getting very angry. If oil stays at $60 for a year, he risks a palace coup from his own Siloviki, former KGB circle. But the Russian president isn't taking any of this lying down.
But what could Putin really do to the U.S. at this point?
Well, Russia has 6,000 nukes, 1,600 of which are still active. But that's not actually the biggest threat Russia poses to America.
How so?
Well, Bob, since the days of the last Cold War, we've transitioned from a world of armed warfare to a world of digital warfare. Today, Putin poses three significant threats to America. He has been attacking our dollar. He's been attacking the petrodollar. And he's been essentially holding a loaded gun at the head of our strongest ally, Europe, through energy leverage. He's been attacking our computer systems, but that one isn't worth getting into here.
Does Russia really have enough financial pull to threaten the dollar?
According to economist John Williams, a Russian sell-off of U.S. bonds could potentially crash the American financial system. He wrote, "The system is very vulnerable, and if the Russians carry through with their threat, you have indeed the risk of it collapsing the system."
Tikka, can you clarify the link between selling U.S. bonds and an attack on the American dollar?
It's probably not worth getting into here, Bob, but the folks at home should look at U.S. bonds and the dollar as the same thing. One of the pillars that prop up the dollar is our U.S. government bonds. If someone gets out of U.S. bonds, it has the same effect of dumping dollars. So the value of the dollar goes down. The nightmare scenario is if there's a chain reaction of countries dumping U.S. bonds.
But the Russians dumped a record number of U.S. treasuries recently, and nothing happened.
Right. More than $20 billion worth in a single month, and nothing happened this time. But it's something to pay attention to, and this is why. The average person may have a 1 in 100 chance of dying in a car accident. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do what you can to prepare.
Right, like get insurance, buy a car with a solid frame, buckle your seatbelt, and so on.
Exactly. Also related to this threat, China and Russia have been collaborating to escape the second pillar that props up the US dollar, and that is something called Petrodollars.
Just to interrupt for a second, Tikka, but what do you mean by Petrodollars?
Well, there's a worldwide standard for trading energy. All global energy transactions generally take place in US dollars. Every time Germany or China or Russia or anyone wants to buy oil, they must buy it in dollars.
I'm with you so far.
Why is this important? Because this creates a forced demand for the currency, making it more valuable than it really is. Just take a look at these numbers from the International Energy Agency. Roughly 94 million barrels of oil trade each day. Let's say oil costs $50 a barrel. So that means the world needs 4.7 billion American dollars to trade oil every single day. That's 1.7 trillion US dollars trading hands for oil every single year. Because of this unrelenting demand for US dollars, we can print our way out of trouble. Unlike other countries, such as post-World War I, Germany and Brazil, which have collapsed under similar policies.
And so Russia knows that by refusing to use the petrodollar, they severely weaken America's stability.
Exactly. We are seeing it happen already. Russia and China are already taking steps to get out of the petrodollar. We know that's true because they've begun trading oil in their own currencies. Putin showed his cards recently when he said, "We're moving away from the dictate of the market that denominates all the commercial oil flows in US dollars." Western news media outlets aren't covering this, but it's a big deal. In fact, it's an act of economic war.
So let me get this straight. Putin is strengthening his own position by pushing the dollar out of international commerce.
Exactly, Bob. Putin's own economic advisor, Sergei Glazyev, has been very vocal about Russia's plans. Now, he isn't bound by the same political considerations as Putin, so he has been very clear about Russia's plans with the local news media. He has outlined a way to undermine the economic strength of America and has recently proposed an anti-dollar coalition of countries willing and able to drop the dollar from their international trade.
Scary words, Tikka, but people say all sorts of things. Where's the threat here?
True, but this guy is a direct line to Putin. He's speaking for the Kremlin. Russia and its allies know that the very foundation of American power is the petrodollar. Without it, our currency and our economy would have collapsed long ago. As long as the world requires dollars to buy and sell oil, the U.S. can keep printing dollars. This is the source of American power that's under attack. And Uncle Sam is not taking this threat lightly.
Okay, before we talk about that, I do have some questions, because from reading your new Cold War Playbook, I know you believe America is preparing some pretty serious countermeasures to deal with Putin and Russia.
Bob, this isn't my belief. These are the facts.
Okay, fair enough. We'll get into that in a moment. But let's talk about the third Russian attack, the loaded gun at Europe you mentioned earlier.
Sure. Did you know that Russia controls more than 40% of the energy supply in Western Europe?
Well, I knew it was a lot, but I didn't know the figure was quite that high. But why should that really matter to us?
Because Europe is America's greatest ally. So Putin's energy dominance is like a financial weapon aimed squarely at our best friend's temple. And Putin hasn't been afraid to use it. He's been known to double the price of gas in the middle of winter and has even shut it off entirely. There was even one stretch where temperatures hit minus 25 degrees, and that's in Celsius, and 11 people froze to death, including 10 in Poland. That's inhumane. And it's no wonder that one Russian reporter recently said the Kremlin firmly believes that gas is our last and our best weapon, the one Europe fears the most.
But Tikka, we're talking about Putin's recent assaults and retaliations against the U.S. This stuff's been happening since 2008.
Yes, but it's been escalating. Just this past year, Putin turned the gas off to Ukraine for 6 months. And even worse, at one point he shut off gas entirely to 6 European countries. Can you imagine if that had happened in America? Especially earlier this year with the winter we had. It was sub-zero too many times to count. I wouldn't know what to say to my wife or daughters if the heat went off in the dead of winter. Make no mistake, this energy leverage is a weapon, and Putin is wielding it like one. And by the way, Bob, none of this is a surprise. I suspect that even if Russia weren't reacting to American sanctions, they'd be attacking America and our allies. You see, after the Cold War, Russia, especially the KGB, vowed to get back at the United States.
Come on, Tikka. The KGB no longer exists.
I know it sounds a bit out there, but remember, Putin's a former agent of the KGB, one of the most ruthless spy agencies the world has seen. It may have been disbanded, but this programming still runs in his blood. That's why he's still brazenly assassinating defectors. Since 2000, 17 journalists and Putin critics have been assassinated in Russia, including a human rights attorney who was shot in the head by a man carrying a silencer-equipped pistol, and Alexander Litvenko, the KGB defector who was poisoned in London with the radioactive substance polonium-210 after a meeting with 2 ex-KGB agents. Plus, we know he harbors a secret hatred for America. What do you remember about the end of the Cold War, Bob?
Well, you know, after the Berlin Wall fell, the Eastern Bloc countries rejoiced, and Reagan and Thatcher were heroes.
Exactly. For Westerners, it was a great moment in history. But for the Russians, it was one of the worst moments in their nation's history, and they've never lost sight of it. In the early 90s, as America boomed, Russia suffered. Bread lines were literally miles long. Prices spiked 300, 400%. The ruble, Russia's currency, crashed. In the midst of this crisis, Putin had already begun plotting Russia's revenge against the West. In 1996, he even stated in a 218-page manifesto of sorts, where he talked about some of the events that are taking place today.
Really? I haven't read anything about this. It sounds a bit far-fetched.
Incredible, I know. It's actually written as an academic paper, but make no mistake, this was Putin's version of Mein Kampf, his manifesto on raising Russia from the Cold War rubble and destroying America. A team of Brookings Institute researchers actually obtained a copy from the Russian State Archive. I seriously doubt they knew what they were handing over at the time. It's no wonder the head of the program, Vladimir Litvenko, was later murdered in London. Anyway, my point is, Putin and Russia have held a grudge for a while now, and recent events, the sanctions and energy prices falling, have been dangerous provocations to an already volatile foe. His actions have been erratic. Russian hackers broke into 9 U.S. banks and hacked 76 million American accounts. Russian bombers recently threatened British airspace. A trio of Russian spies were arrested this January in New York City. The Manhattan U.S. attorney was quoted as saying, "The arrests make clear that more than 2 decades after the presumptive end of the Cold War, Russian spies continue to seek to operate in our midst under the cover of secrecy."
Tikka, I know you're not a conspiracy theorist, but you have to admit that that's what it sounds like.
I know, Bob, I know. But these are the facts, and I've had a team of researchers digging into this situation for the past 6 months. Here's my point. To us, all of these recent movements, the attack on the dollar, the Russian spies planted in America, the cyber attacks, the energy attacks in Europe, seems erratic and arbitrary. But to Russians, they're the culmination of decades of planning and resentment.
Tikka, for argument's sake, let's assume you're 100% right on this. I'd like to talk a little bit about what our viewers at home can do to prepare for this situation, and that brings us to the new Cold War Playbook, the guide to this situation that you just published. Part of this playbook details a weapon America has developed to cripple the Russian economy and return large amounts of money to everyday Americans. Tikka, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Absolutely. America is planning a counterstrike, which could really put Russia in its place, transfer billions of dollars from Russia to both Europe and the US, and cause certain areas of the US economy to skyrocket in the process.
Okay, so this counterstrike, what are we talking about here? A new age nuclear weapon, some sort of military science project? What?
That's not what I'm saying, Bob. It's a weapon of sorts that will cut Putin off at his knees and transfer a huge amount of wealth to the US and proactive US investors.
Okay, I still find it hard to believe there's a weapon like that out there.
That's music to my ears, Bob. The last time my views were questioned live was in 2011. I was on the Fox Business Network being quizzed on where investors should put their money. At the time, I said the best trade that I saw was to buy US dollars and 30-year treasuries. The host of the show laughed outright at me on the air. She asked whether I wanted to stand behind my prediction. I said I did. The call I made proved to be the bottom in the US dollar. Since then, the dollar has appreciated by 26%. That's a massive move for a currency. My bond call did even better. 30-year treasuries rose 40% over the next 18 months. So being laughed at or being called naive usually means I'm on the right track, relying on solid research rather than blind opinion. So Bob, have no doubt about it, Russia is a clear threat to American interests. There's a major threat to our petrodollar supremacy, and they have a ton of natural gas and oil. They're basically holding our biggest ally, Western Europe, hostage with their lock on natural resources in the region.
Look, I know Europe is a great friend, but other than that, why should we, normal tax-paying Americans, care?
I'm not here to discuss personal politics. The reason you should care, though, is because of the possibilities once this United States weapon is unleashed. It could cripple Russia, Putin, and provide an opportunity for smart investors to make a small fortune. What we're talking about is a major geopolitical event, which could literally affect everyone. These events are almost always polarizing. On one hand, your money is not 100% safe from this financial war with Russia. On the other, you could potentially make large profits. I found a few safe ways to make a killing off the weapon the U.S. is preparing to launch.
By weapon, you mean?
By weapon, I mean the manipulation of energy and currency markets. I'm talking about modern warfare, and those are Speaker of the House John Boehner's words, not mine. In a March op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal, he called for Washington to liberate its natural energy as a weapon against Russian President Vladimir Putin.
He's talking about exporting natural gas, right?
Correct.
So how is that our big weapon?
I know, it sounds hard to believe. When we think of weapons, we still think of missiles and nukes. We're in a currency and economic war, and the glut of natural gas we have can indeed be used as a potent weapon. Today, the U.S. Energy Department estimates that we have 25 trillion cubic meters of recoverable shale gas. If you add that to our other oil and gas resources, America has enough energy to last for 2 centuries. We're already the world's biggest producer of natural gas, and you can add oil to that list too. We produce more oil and gas than both Saudi Arabia and Russia. In fact, we're producing so much natural gas that we have a glut here in the United States. All that extra supply has pushed down prices. But here's the thing. Natural gas prices are much higher abroad than they are here. And that's one of the reasons we are now getting ready to sell it overseas.
So then we're really talking about LNG, or liquefied natural gas.
Correct. And for the folks at home, that's how you transport natural gas over long distances. If you cool it to negative 260 degrees Fahrenheit, the gas turns into a liquid. The volume shrinks by a factor of 600, which makes it easier to store and ship.
So your argument is America has all of this natural gas. The rest of the world wants it. By selling it overseas, we can liberate our European friends from their reliance on Russia and stick it to Putin. Have I got that right?
Yes. In fact, there are a couple of developments unfolding behind the scenes right now that could cause this whole opportunity to open up big time in America's favor in 2015.
Look, Tikka, I know you wanted to share with our viewers how they can prepare for this, but I've got to ask you first, can American companies really make money shipping gas all the way overseas?
Absolutely. It costs us very little to produce gas here. And even when you add the cost of liquefying it and transporting it, American gas is still cheaper than what Putin can offer and what most countries can purchase anywhere else.
So what kind of a price differential are we talking about here, Tikka?
Gazprom, Putin's energy money wagon, needs to charge about $12 per 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas just to break even. And they sell it for $16 per 1,000 cubic feet in Eastern Europe. In America, the cost to pull gas out of the ground here is as low as just 75 cents per 1,000 cubic feet. When you add in the cost of turning it into LNG and shipping it, that tacks on another approximately $6 to $7, bringing the total cost to between $7 to $8. Still, half the price of what it sells for in Russia. So Russia's break-even point for selling natural gas is a price where American companies can actually turn a profit. You can see why this is such a huge opportunity for American companies and European consumers, but also for the U.S. government to really have some leverage. America gets to derail Putin's profit train by flooding Europe with cheap American natural gas. This is the masterstroke that will finally break Putin's hold over Europe's energy markets.
But what about falling oil prices we've all been seeing? Doesn't this hurt the LNG companies?
On the surface, you would think so, but let me explain why it doesn't. Part of this play is based on taking advantage of the price difference of natural gas in America and the price of natural gas overseas. No matter how low or how high natural gas prices go, the spread basically stays the same.
So let me get this straight. The amount of money you can make by producing it in America and selling it in Europe is not always affected by swings in global energy prices.
Correct, because price isn't even the biggest consideration for the Europeans. It's about security. It's about securing a long-term supply of energy from an ally rather than an enemy. And make no mistake about it, Putin's Russia is the enemy.
Tikka, is there an infrastructure in place to allow this to happen?
Yes, Poland is actually building a terminal right now to begin receiving LNG from the United States within the next 3 months. And in fact, the U.S. government, who has been notorious in dragging its feet in LNG approvals, is already mobilizing against the Russian threat. The House just passed the Domestic Prosperity and Global Freedom Act. It requires the Energy Department to expedite U.S. LNG exports. As the president recently stated, the United States has already approved licenses for natural gas exports, which will increase global supply and benefit partners like Europe. In effect, we've lifted a ban on U.S. natural gas exports. This is the catalyst that could release more than 24 U.S. energy export projects all at once and torpedo Putin's dreams of Russian power. The recent events in the Ukraine and Russia's assault on the U.S. dollar have sped things up. Natural gas is heading overseas this year. Projects are finally being approved. U.S. companies are already signing contracts to sell gas overseas. In short, the LNG weapon is being unleashed one way or another. This is the new face of modern warfare. It'll give us an opening to take money right out of Putin's accounts and put it right in yours.
Can this really move the needle in the war we're waging against Putin?
That's an excellent question, Bob. If we review the facts, they sure are compelling. Half of Russia's GDP growth comes from energy sales. Russia provides Europe with more than 40% of its gas. Plus, the European Union spends $1.26 billion a day on energy imports. That's $459 billion per year. And at 40%, they're paying Russia at least $183 billion a year.
Okay, so what happens as U.S. natural gas enters the scene?
Well, look at Russia's biggest energy giant. According to one New York-based think tank I studied, Gazprom, one of the companies Putin is rumored to have a stake in, could suffer an 18% drop in revenue. That's a $27 billion hit. And that's just one source of Russia's energy revenue. Russia's GDP is over $2 trillion, and 1/3 of it comes from energy. And nearly half of its GDP growth since 2000 has come from energy sales. But the big deal is how much American money is pouring into this new weapon. And that's why, if you back the right companies, there's a rare opportunity to make a fortune right now. If you look at every wave of American energy boom since 2004, a few key companies involved in extracting and transporting energy were the ones that made investors gobs of money. In 2004, when oil production was ramping up, it was Southwestern Energy, which rose more than 500%. In 2009, during the shale gas boom, it was companies like Atlas Energy, which rose an astounding 2,079% through 2013. Had you put $5,000 in the stock back then, you'd be sitting on $103,000 today. Already, U.S. companies have invested $120 billion into LNG projects. That's 6 times more than what the federal government has spent on nuclear-related defense projects this year, and 4 times more money than what they've allocated for health research.
Okay, so we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar wealth transfer.
Yes, Putin is not going to be happy about it. And that's why you need to be careful about what kinds of investments you have in your retirement accounts and mutual funds and portfolios.
Tikka, I'd like to talk to you about your new Cold War Playbook. Our producers and owners at the Palm Beach Research Group believe it's so important that they're going to give everyone watching today's broadcast immediate online access to it at the end of the program. Tell us a little bit about it.
Sure, Bob. The new Cold War Playbook is a comprehensive 5-part guide that tells you exactly what to do to safeguard your money during this crisis and potentially make a lot of money too.
Is this something that anybody can use?
Absolutely. It's written for the person who knows nothing about currency wars or financial matters and who may be hearing about this situation for the first time today. Part 1 of the playbook is a briefing called How to Prosper from the Coming U.S. LNG Boom. Inside, you'll learn how to own the most strategically significant and potentially lucrative businesses and assets in the LNG boom. In any war, what are the most valuable items to own?
Tikka, I'm going to guess guns and gold.
Well, yes, of course, but even more valuable are the supply lines. In the French and Indian War, the Brits battled to control French supply lines down the St. Lawrence. In World War II, the battles in North Africa were over the Suez Canal. And in the Civil War, railways were hugely important. That's how robber barons of the day, Carnegie, Gould, and Vanderbilt, became insanely rich by building and controlling the railroads. Today, it's no different. I've found 3 ways to dominate the supply chain in the U.S. LNG boom. One is a company that has already established itself as a major transporter of natural gas in the States. They have over 10,000 miles of natural gas pipelines and over 5,000 miles of electric transmission lines. This is important because you can't just hop into the LNG business. The companies that will flourish and make a lot of money for investors will be the ones with established infrastructure and contracts in the American natural gas hotbeds. What's really exciting about this company, and I won't name names here, but they just inked 20-year deals to export LNG to a couple of major countries. Even more exciting, they recently received permission from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to build an LNG export facility. Bottom line, this business is a great way to potentially make a lot of money in the coming LNG boom.
Tell us about the other 2 companies you found.
Viewers will get the details in the report I mentioned.
And the report you're talking about is called How to Prosper from the Coming U.S. LNG Boom. That's part 1 of your playbook. And like I said before, we'll send a copy free of charge to every viewer interested today. Okay, Tikka, please tell us about part 2 of the playbook.
Part 2 of the playbook is a briefing called Supercharged Utilities, How to Pocket Income from the Greatest Wealth Transfer of the Decade. What's essentially happening in the LNG boom is a major wealth transfer. Money is flowing from the hands of Russia and Putin into the hands of Europeans and Americans. I believe there will be many beneficiaries, but one of the biggest could be European utility companies. Consider one of Britain's largest utility providers. They just signed a 20-year, multi-billion-dollar deal to buy American LNG. This is a major shift and should be a boon to that utility company. This is a game changer in a country that has historically been dependent on Russia for gas.
Retirees love utilities because they pay out reliable income. I read somewhere that even Warren Buffett owns a few utilities.
Exactly, Bob. The UK company I just mentioned pays out twice as much income as the average US utility.
And so a UK company. Are these easy to buy, Tikka?
The 3 utilities I found all trade in the United States, so they're just as easy to invest in as Hershey's or Coca-Cola. And the best part is they'll see massive amounts of wealth pour in from cheaper energy costs.
Okay, thanks, Tikka. Let's move on to part 3. This is what you call the watch list.
Yes, the first 2 parts of the playbook talk about how to prosper from this situation. Part 3 gets into how to protect your retirement accounts. I call it the new Cold War watch list. You see, we found through our research that a surprisingly large number of Western companies are doing way too much business with Russia. Household names too, like Deere & Company, They make the popular Deere tractors and farming equipment such as harvesters. They've been expanding into Russia, which produces a large amount of grain for Europe. Deere has 2 factories in Russia. As Russia continues to take hits, this stock will see its business falter. So we came up with a list of U.S. companies that have substantial exposure to Russia and its allies. You should cross-reference this list with your holdings right away. Some of these you should just make sure you don't buy or monitor if you own them in your portfolio or in a mutual fund. Others are toxic and you should stay away completely.
Now, part 4 of the playbook is different. Can you tell us about that?
One of my biggest passions is educating. I spent years as a director of an educational institute for retirees. I love teaching people what I know and giving folks the confidence to take matters into their own hands. That's why I created the Digital Dashboard. This is an online video where I explain 5 simple indicators you can follow on your own to monitor this situation from home. For instance, there's one chart you can follow online to assess Russia's health in this war. There's one simple indicator you can use to monitor Russia's attacks on the dollar. There's an easy site where you can see how quickly America is ramping up its LNG projects. Of course, I monitor these things myself and will share them with the folks at home, but there's something to be said about taking matters into your own hands too.
That's a great idea, Tikka. And finally, the one I'm most excited about personally is the 5th part of the new Cold War Playbook. I believe, and many of our viewers do too, that the currency you keep your wealth in is just as important, if not more important, than what you invest in.
Bob, I couldn't agree more. But I'm worried that some people I talk to, and these are even folks who own stocks and retirement accounts, have a hard time believing currency markets have anything to do with them. But I remind them what happened in the early 70s. At 9 p.m. on August 15th, 1971, Richard Nixon appeared on live primetime TV and told the world that the U.S. dollar would no longer be backed by gold. Do you remember what that announcement did?
Do I? Oil shot up and stocks tanked.
Correct, they did. And the U.S. dollar began losing purchasing power from the moment he made that announcement. This currency event, now known as the Nixon shock, affected everyone in America. Decades later, we're still reeling from it. That single event sent the world's currency markets and global economy into a tailspin. That's why today, and until we get back on some sort of reliable standard, everyone needs to own a little bit of gold. If the dollar ever loses value, your gold holdings will capture it.
So, what's the best way?
I found a fantastic way to own gold, Bob. It's easy to buy. You can do it through the stock market. Your gold is stored and backed by the Canadian government, so you know it's safe. But here are some interesting perks of owning gold this way. 1, if your stake is big enough, then you are allowed to redeem a portion for physical gold once a month if you'd like. They'll even ship it to you and deduct the cost from your stake. 2, you can own this play in an IRA or Roth IRA. And 3, finally, if ever you decide to sell, you are only taxed at 15% or so, not the 28% tax rate that most coins and gold ETFs are taxed.
What happens if the U.S. dollar keeps rising, as it has been since '08? I mean, doesn't that keep the price of gold low?
That's a great question. In the long run, the dollar faces serious problems. But for now, it's a stable currency where countries and big institutions still turn to for safety. When the dollar is rising, gold prices either stagnate or fall. I found a way for you to own this investment that takes most of that currency risk out of the equation. It's a hedge fund trick I picked up from my days on Wall Street.
Sounds complicated, Tikka.
You're right. Normally it is a very complicated endeavor, but I found a simple way that anyone can do it. It's just the second button you check when you go to your brokerage account. I've included the full details of this opportunity in the 5th part of my playbook. It's a special briefing called The #1 Way to Own Gold, Even If the Dollar Rises.
Great, thanks Tikka. So just to recap, the new Cold War Playbook is a comprehensive 5-part guide that tells you precisely what you need to do to protect yourself and potentially profit from this situation. We believe every one of our viewers needs to have access to the findings and recommendations it contains. And that's why we at the Palm Beach Research Group would like to send our viewers at home a free copy of everything Tikka has prepared. How to prosper from the coming U.S. LNG boom. Supercharged Utilities, how to pocket income from the greatest wealth transfer of the decade. The new Cold War watch list. The digital dashboard and the #1 way to own gold, even if the dollar rises. We've arranged for a way to give everyone watching this broadcast immediate online access to this package for free. In return, we just ask that you take a risk-free trial subscription to Tikka's monthly research service called Megatrends. Tikka, can you tell us about Megatrends' role in everything we've talked about today?
Sure, Bob. I don't know if the folks at home have had this experience, but a couple of years ago, I was getting sick of the overload of information and so-called threats I was seeing every 5 minutes on CNBC and various media outlets. I was getting bombarded with questions from friends and family. Is ISIS a threat? Is my pension safe? Is Ebola really an issue? And on and on. I was living in the mountains with my family far away from Wall Street and the hedge fund business. I'd made more than enough money. I just wanted a slower pace. But I quickly saw a need to share my views on the real trends that matter with people who wanted to know. I wanted to help them on their journey to personal and financial independence.
Tikka, for those who may not be familiar with your research, I took the liberty of looking up a few of your findings. The first thing I noticed was a trend you called income extermination.
Yes, I noticed the U.S. income market had become seriously bloated and overvalued. A lot of the so-called safe investments retirees were piling into, certain mutual funds, stocks, and municipal bonds were actually quite risky. So I issued a warning and gave a list of names retirees should get out of.
I saw that IPFF, for example, the International Preferred Stock ETF, dropped by as much as 20%.
Yes, and there's a list of 300 plus at-risk investments we're still monitoring, which subscribers have access to. But Bob, by far one of the biggest trends on my radar right now is the economic conflict between the United States and Russia.
Well, Tikka, I must say that everything you've talked about today really resonates with me. And I'm excited we're going to be releasing your new Cold War Playbook to the attendees of today's broadcast. Thanks for taking the time today, Tikka. Your playbook will definitely make a huge difference in the lives of our viewers.
It was my pleasure being here today. Thank you for having me, Bob.
Today, just as we saw in the Second World War and the Cold War that followed, global powers are shifting and aligning. Lines are being drawn, and while the threat of nuclear conflict isn't what it was in the 60s and 70s, weapons of a different kind are being launched. Once again, there's a need for Americans to protect themselves. Over the past 20 years, Tikka Tiwari has guided clients, readers, and family through 3 of the world's worst financial crises, including the crash of '08. By making some simple moves today, you can protect what you have and potentially enrich your family in the midst of this new Cold War. Everything you need is in Tikka's new Cold War Playbook. How to prosper from the coming U.S. LNG boom. Supercharged Utilities. how to pocket income from the greatest wealth transfer of the decade, the new Cold War watch list, the digital dashboard, and the #1 way to own gold, even if the dollar rises. The retail value of all 5 of these pieces is $195, but you can get immediate online access to the entire playbook for free, simply for taking a no-risk trial subscription to Tikka's Megatrends newsletter today. Typically, this service costs as much as $199 a year, but you can get access through this special offer for just $149. That's an amazing deal when you consider that you had to have $1 million in assets for Tikka to talk to you when he ran his hedge fund. And just imagine the peace of mind you'll have knowing that you're partnered with an individual who has spotted every major financial crisis of the past 20 years before they've transpired. You'll have a full year to evaluate Tikka's work. If at any point during your 1-year subscription you decide it's not right for you, then contact our customer care department and you'll receive a full refund. The new Cold War Playbook will be yours to keep either way. But that's not all you'll receive. If you activate your trial subscription within the next 30 minutes, we'll shave another $50 from the price, knocking the total cost down to $99, more than a 50% discount from the normal price. Plus, we will immediately upgrade your subscription to Platinum level, which unlocks more of Tikka's premium content for you, including Tikka's 5-part ETF video series. Here Tikka shares the trading secrets he picked up as a hedge fund manager on Wall Street. This information alone could save you thousands in Wall Street fees and commissions. You'll receive his 21-page PDF on the extra dividend loophole, which could put hundreds of extra dividends in your account. You'll also receive his 22-page PDF on Warren Buffett's secret 600% investment. It's not a bond or an option, nor is it a stock of any kind, but you can buy it just as easily, and the returns are often 2 to 3 times higher. Plus, there are a few more perks that you'll receive when you click on the link below. But remember, these extra perks and benefits, including the extra price break, are only good for the next 30 minutes. All told, you'll receive over $600 worth of life-changing premium content for just $99. Above all, you'll get the new Cold War Playbook, which is yours free through this offer. So click the button below. You can review this information one more time in the recap on the next page, then activate your trial subscription. Thanks for watching today. I hope you learned a few things and enjoyed the interview. I know I have. Again, just click the button below to get started.